Hello, and welcome to the Providence College Podcast. Before we get started with this episode, I just wanted to make you aware of a couple other podcasts we have here at PC. Bill Hudson, former chair and current professor of political science, hosts Beyond Your Newsfeed, Understanding Contemporary Politics. Bill and other members of the Political Science Department provide expert analysis of current political events and issues, delving more deeply into their causes and consequences than can be found in typical media sources. And over in athletics, Inside Friartown with Bob Driscoll is a monthly show covering the latest news in Friartown and college athletics. Find out what former Friars are up to now and hear current coaches discuss how they're molding championship student athletes on and off the field. Please rate, review, and subscribe to both of these great shows along with the Providence College Podcast on all popular podcast platforms including Spotify, iTunes, and Google Music. This week's episode features a reading by class of 2005 alum Stephan Delbos for the Department of English. The writer, poet, and playwright recently returned to campus, and we are going to pick up with an introduction by poetry professor Shard Denord.
He earned his BA at Providence College in 2005, his PhD from Charles University. His poetry, essays, and translations have appeared most recently in Absinthe, Agni, Asymptote. These are wonderful journals. Atlanta Review, Blaze Vox, the Brooklyn Quarterly, Expound, 14 Hills, The Enchanted Verses, Literary Review, the Istanbul Review, Molly Bloom, New Lectures, Poetry International. These are not easy magazines to get your work into. He's the editor of From a Terrace in Prague, a Prague poetry anthology, a collection of visual music-inspired poems, bagatelles for a typewriter, was exhibited at Art Space Gallery in Prague in 2012. I think he's learned Czech also. I left that out. It's true, right? It's not easy language. My son-in-law's Czech. I can't understand a word. And it's just such a musical, syncopated language. I'd love to learn it. He plays Chetty's Lullaby about trumpet legend Chet Baaker was produced in his play called Chetty's Lullaby was produced in San Francisco, and it's about Chet Baaker, the great trumpet legend. His play Deaf Empire about Czech composer Bedřich Smetana was produced by the Prague Shakespeare Company in 2017. His co-translation of The Absolute Gravedigger by Czech poet Vítězslav Nezval was awarded the Penn Heim Translation Grant in 2015 and was published by Twisted Spoon Press. He's the author of the poetry chapbook In Memory of Fire. Cape Cod Poetry Review published this, and the poetry collection Light Reading, 2018. He's a founding editor of the journal Body. Stephan sent me this book for a little comment, and I couldn't figure out what to write at first. It's a beautiful book. As you can see, the poems are pretty short, but beautifully economical and memorable. And this is what I wrote. The poems in Light Reading interrupt silence with whispers, occasional shouts, erasures, spaces. Delbos's lines resonate with startling spontaneity and sprezzatura. That's a kind of it's an old term going back to the 13th and 14th century medieval times. It means a wonderful kind of spontaneity. A master minimalist, he writes with risible, that means funny, daring, and poignance. His mind is at poetic play throughout these refreshing poems, leaping with erudition, dreamlike strangeness, and Czech allusions that would charm Kafka. Your brain, a beehive, and honey tastes like blood, he writes in Bagatelle for Grigory Ligeti. Eternal light and honeycomb. I love the buzz and blood of this book. Welcome back, Stephan.
Thank you very much. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here back at PC. so much has changed since I was here, many new buildings and things, but a lot has stayed the same. It still feels like home to a certain extent. So thank you, Chard, for the introduction, and thank you, Bruce, for the invitation, and thank you all for coming. I'm going to be reading tonight from 3 different collections, and I'd like to begin with 2 earlier poems, and these are 2 elegiac poems. This first poem is the title poem for my chapbook, In Memory of Fire. And the poem, In Memory of Fire, it's about trying to hold on to the good old days and experiences that we have that are meaningful. Until our flesh gives birth to bones, when the bridges of our fingers fall to earth, until our eyes ignite in memory of fire, flash bulbed as the dead sockets of blind men, when this prophecy is elegy, we won't remember that May evening in a park when the flickering lanterns of lightning paraphrased our faces, but until the beds in which we slept are cinders, and those cinders ash, and ash a vacant story for the wind, until that city where I reigned the wild carriage of your tears becomes a tenement of ice, the borrowed letters of our names, a scattered flock of startled crows. The days we shared are indestructible. This second poem is called Tiny Miracles, and it's kind of a youthful poem. Tiny Miracles. Tonight I watched the tiny miracle of street lamps waking, false stars strung where sunlight failed as I leaned on a phone booth by a boulevard thick with numb machines. Tungsten teaches us darkness falls, but rise and burn, yes, nevertheless. Stumbling home on a decade-old dawn, I saw stoplights blink like beating hearts, but the bloodshot stare of a high school dropout all-night gas station cashier shone lonelier. In youth, I did not know the body is a hollow place we hold a spark. Oh, matchstick life, please keep me lit. This next poem is, I feel compelled to read it and honored to read this poem here. This is a poem that is dedicated to a musician that I used to play with when I went to Providence College. And I was playing, as Chard alluded to, I was playing a lot of guitar. And there used to be the Providence Phoenix newspaper back when newspapers existed. And I answered an ad in the like a want ad back when want ads existed. Somebody was looking for a guitar player for a band. The band was called Mantis Cadre, and so I answered this thing, and I went to this guy's house, and it was Walter Aller, who turned out to be one of the most interesting people I've ever met. He was an Egyptologist at Brown and a multi-instrumentalist. He played, just all of these instruments. Many of which I'd never even heard of. And he had this whole concept. He had all these songs written for this group called Mantis Cadre. And so we started to play together. It was really weird. We played at McPhail's one time. There used to be a club down Oakland Street called, Oakland Ave, called The Living Room. We played there. And then I went to Prague for my junior year. And while I was there, he died of cancer. And so this poem is called 10-Bar Blues. So typically a blues song is 12 bars. One bar is 4 beats, and in a blues form you have 12 bars. But Walter had a song that was 13-bar blues. It sounded as weird as it sounds. And so this is 10-bar blues, which is too short. It's cut off as he was. So 10-Bar Blues, in memoriam, Walter Aller, 1954-2003. My tryst with jazz, I should mention that this poem mentions a few jazz players like Miles Davis and John Coltrane, who you should know if you don't. 10-bar blues. My tryst with jazz flared one year and burned like a blue note for miles. High on second-hand hits, breath through saxophones and trumpets, I lurked in jukebox basements, music bars, and taught my fingers to walk melodic minor scales along the neck of a hollow-body Gibson. Boulevards in my world were vinyl. The moon was mother of pearl. Some sessions were elemental, thunderclouds in every pore, fingers wind-blown shutters, each head a house made vacant for the vagrant five we were, every note an open door. Most were blazing afternoons of dust among drifters. In a rented room we kissed, the lips of empty bottles, desperate for a taste of rain. Electrified jazz fusion with a nod to chaos theory in the divine work of one Dr. Timothy Leary. Mantis Cadre at the Living Room, live tonight. Straight down Oakland Avenue at Dunkin' Donuts, take a right. Everyone knows the story. Miles Davis, strung out, twisted in the grip of heroin addiction, on stage addled, doubled over, hardly strong enough to hold his trumpet, peels the first notes of denial like gauze from a festering wound. Or Coltrane at 3 a.m., inches from the television, pinching tone between his teeth, his fingertips and thumbs, rippling up and down every scale he knows at once, saxophone blown, polyphonic, blood in the glare of I Love Lucy, trickling mouth to mouthpiece. Who knows Walter Aller's story? Or is it mine, how bleached and brittled by chemotherapy, kept secret from our band? Every night he lugged his clarinet, 2 amplifiers, keyboard, flute, synthesizer, alto saxophone, and theremin, up 4 flights an hour early for rehearsal to construct his portable laboratory. Psychedelic audio mechanic, sonic Frankenstein, his music fucked, one critic said, with listeners' libidos. Until the saxophone slipped his lips while he soloed 10-bar blues, a tune 8 beats too short, and he sat down shaking like he couldn't make the changes. Stepping dream-sheened past midnight, stoned on an east side double set, down the held breath of an empty street, sunken under ice I stop. As Walter speaks, his face a mirror for the failing, emaciated moon. Hear the staccato of snow? April, symphony crescendo, timpani magnolias, buttercup soprano, cymbal wash of wind through cherry blossoms, city 7 bridges break, April. Gardens in my ears are open, April, and I'm thinking of a dead jazz musician. Lived in a record box across the ocean, mounted butterflies and family photographs on felt, monuments to motion stopped. Trumpets tipple wind the river sheds like a secret I can't hear, for ostinatos, notes I played with ghosts on parquet stages when days were easily divided by half-step staffs and signatures, and I lived on the bricks of a Renaissance city with another name. Railroad bridge above black water, tumors rupture girders, approaching locomotive. Beside the tracks tonight I'm here to hear, trains shake steel like Mingus thrummed an upright railroad bridge above black water, locomotive passing. Hands on the railing, I'm riding the rattle, packed of metal and flesh, unwritten score of a passing chorus, tumors rupture girders, trains shake steel, timbres imperfect as memory momentarily sustained on a railroad bridge above black water. Hands on the railing, I'm riding the rattle, packed of metal and flesh, unwritten score of a passing chorus, whole ghost notes hummed guttural like Mingus thrummed an upright. Tumors rupture girders, trains shake steel, railroad bridge above black water, coda, not an ode. I'd like to read a handful of poems from this book called The Absolute Gravedigger, which is a book that I translated by the Czech surrealist poet Vítězslav Nezval. The book's from 1937, and Nezval was a very talented and prolific poet in the 1920s and 30s before he became a hardcore communist and started writing poems about Stalin, and then the quality kind of went down. But this book is, I'd like to read a handful of poems from a section of this book called Bizarre Town. And this is 44 poems, each one is numbered, and each one is just kind of a glimpse, a little moment, a little keyhole view into life in this bizarre town that he conjures up. And so I'll read a handful of these, and they're all numbered, but I won't. I'll just pause in between. Under the slender Gothic arch of a water tower stands a beardless young man, lamp in hand. In his vaulted chest a bell. When he coughs, the bell rings, and in the town open in one fell swoop all the windows. Under the molding of the rectory, covered in silver tinfoil, hang long strings fastened to the tips of pillows that swaddle 12 small children as they swing above 12 wooden cups 12 ostrich eggs sit in. 12 huge roosters pound their beaks into those enamel shells which emit like a carillon the short tones of a diatonic scale played very quickly, top to bottom, bottom to top, and then at random, composing a lullaby. Here's one I think you'll all relate to. At the table in a low, vaulted room, from whose walls, covered in frames of various sizes, stares the exact same portrait painted 21 times of a man from the 16th century. 21 sisters seated offer a toast to their 21st birthdays with 21 glasses of cut crystal reflecting 21 times 21 low vaulted rooms from whose walls, covered in frames of various sizes, stares the exact same portrait painted 21 times of a man from the 16th century. On a stovetop that does not light, a peacock spread its azure tail and sparkled amid a moonlit night. Two nurses holding above their heads open umbrellas, each at one end of the footbridge the sleepwalker crosses, carefully conceal the sun with those two almost holy parasols and wait for the moon above the deep darkness their fair hair glitters in to rise, to lead happily the somnambulist with brooding eyes to their quivering, charitably outstretched fingertips in which is concentrated the brilliant spark of sudden awakening. I'd like to read some poems from my newest collection, Light Reading, which Chard so generously and fulsomely blurbed. Thank you, Chard. And I also have some copies of these books here. If anyone's interested, just come talk to me afterwards. The first section of the book is called Light Reading. And so Light Reading, the title, we think of light reading, some reading that's not too demanding, but also thinking about the way that light reads objects. When light is touching an object, shining on an object, it's kind of reading the object. And so that duality of the title, Light Reading, that duality of kind of surface and depth the cliche meaning and a kind of more inventive meaning carries throughout the collection. So the first section of the book are very short poems, and the titles are on the bottom of the page. So you read the titles actually after you read the poem, in a similar way as when you look at a painting in a gallery, and then the title is down there at the bottom. So, but typically, well, they're very hard to read that way out loud. So I'm just going to kind of go through and read a few of these. I'll read the title first, and we'll go through and see how it goes. The first poem's called Obeyed. What you cried when you came from the womb is your name. Last night, and just like that, I was wearing Johnny Walker's hat. A hole with a hole in it, she wrote, a kind of toast to morning, wrought light. On coat racks, if only all life were so simple, here hang your shells, shadows, shame. 21st century man, I think I will still try to survive. Darkness static soundtracks me. Luck, impossibly, yes. After Ovid, if I could meddle in moss between cobblestones tamped by footprints and sunlight, or be a samurai, I'd don the latter's armor, honoring neither choice nor indecision, simply cutting any matter in my way. Election day, 2 teams, same scrum. Yonkers, the more I think about dreaming, the more I dream about thinking. Exile, they came for me, I was gone. Sauna, heat licks footprints from wood. Accidental Occident. Eventually Middle East of what one wonders, O Copernicus. Actually, Auschwitz after poetry is barbaric. This one is called Rosy-Fingered Dawn, and it's Rosy-Fingered Dawn is a translation from the Odyssey. Homer, in many English translations anyways, when he's describing dawn, he says rosy-fingered dawn. And this poem is about staying up all night, with a romantic interest. Flocks of song outside. We drop the glasses, words are to bear, breakable parts for stranger fingers as air and light enfold untouchable birds. Autumn Prague. Wandering with cider, glass typewriter. It's called Fragments. It's a breakup poem. In tiny pieces, tiny parts, I whose bruises, broke pillows, sleep under paper sheets. Thanksgiving for what we have made of what we are. The second section of this book is called Bagatelles for Typewriter. A bagatelle is a French word. It's usually associated with classical music, and it means a trifle, something that doesn't mean too much, hasn't been too labored over, as opposed to, a symphony or something. But there's a certain degree of irony in using the word to describe a piece of music, or in this case, poems. If you write an incredibly complex and complicated, ingenious and interesting piece of music, and then you say, "Oh, I just tossed this off in a few minutes," you're kind of playing with the listener a little bit. And so all of these poems are they begin with bagatelle. So this is bagatelle. Each one is a bagatelle for something. So this is bagatelle for tofu, Szechuan tofu, Tsingtao, Li Bo, and plate spinner. Tofu and Li Bo were poets of the Tang dynasty in ancient China, and they were friends, and they used to wander around in the mountains drinking wine and looking at the stars, and they would write poems about drinking wine and looking at the stars. And Li Bo, as the legend goes, died. He was drunk, and he tried to embrace the reflection of the moon in a river and drowned. So that's not recommended. Szechuan tofu is a spicy tofu dish you can get at any Chinese restaurant. Tsingtao is a Chinese beer, and plate spinner is when people spin the plates on a stick, a kind of performance, and that originated in ancient China. So this poem takes place in a Chinese restaurant, and it's thinking about these Chinese poets and life and death and springtime, and it's kind of using these stereotypes in a knowing and an ironic way to build off them into something greater. Bagatelle for tofu, Szechuan tofu, Tsingtao, Li Bo, and plate spinner. April shows a nipple, but only one. For 5 days I have sold my waking hours, a fool like the cook who walks ranting from the closet kitchen with plates shaped like frisbees, long, slow prayer of spring, park afternoon, perfect toss unlabored, hovering, may not deign to sink unlike my plate of tofu, rehydrated mushrooms, yellow peppers, ginger slop, and rice, half-drunken lunch. Never was I so alone. Such lunch. Tofu's buddy Li Bo died trying to hug the moon with sodden arms reflected in a river. In my mind sometimes I am in China, falling through the Chinese air, pockets filled with teriyaki chicken wings. I live a 6-month journey from my parents, where their ages, a grandfather clock earring, pain, what the Tang poets took for granted. Language outlives us. The waitress asks, "Do you want chopsticks?" Of course, but rice is difficultly singular, so I lick surreptitiously the plate when she goes, "Spicy moon." There's this phrase in here, "such lunch," and some of my students in Prague who've heard this poem and who bought the book, so they've taken to using this phrase "such lunch" instead of saying, instead of swearing or something. They just say, "Oh, such lunch, such lunch." So I suggested maybe we could get it started here in Providence. Such lunch, right? Next time something bad happens to you, just say "such lunch." This is bagatelle for ancient values, jaw harp, and lyre, the instrument lyre. This is kind of meditating on myth, belief, values. What is worth believing is impossible to believe, and really only that will save you someday from pyres of doubt, sorrow, deprivation. Ghost notes don't know they are not there. Phantom limbs, irrefutable evidence of forces injurious, conspiring to deprive us of ourselves and one another. "Don't do this, Odysseus," screamed the suitors. The mystery unites us, or shall we recognize the microchip, the matchbook, the God particle catalytic converters, snowblowers, sea bream fillet, shucked oysters, instant coffee, windowsill orchids, personal computers, personal space, social media, space heaters, takeout styrofoam, first class, Grammy nominations, soft drinks, shampoo, plus conditioner in one, dandruff, eczema, flatulence, not the stuff I assure you myths are made of. There be dragons. The last bagatelle I'll read is Bagatelle for Philip Glass and Pipe Organ in Lieu of Prayer. Philip Glass, great composer, especially his works for piano, mostly from the 1980s. I really, really love his music. And the day after the election, last election, presidential election, Philip Glass played in Prague, and my wife and I had tickets, and we sat in the front row, and he was playing alone, just him on piano, very, small. I think he's in his 80s now, but he came out, he didn't say a word, he sat down, and he started playing these piano works, and my wife and I just started crying uncontrollably. And that's not what this is about necessarily. It's inspired by Philip Glass's music, and it's about being an altar boy, though not what you're thinking probably. Bagatelle for Philip Glass and Pipe Organ in Lieu of Prayer. Thoughtless on a sunny day, empowered by the radiance, let us pray. Forgive the merciless indifference we pay, tabernacle and tackle box. How easy tiny joys elude us. Joy eludes us, yet we, preening pride in the annihilated need to kneel before anything unless observing ceremonies necessary to get ahead to heaven or the boardroom. As an altar boy, I loved velvet silences of sacristies, brass taper holders, bell-shaped snuff that flamed a hand to reach me as I, mischievous, melted old wax with a wooden match and hollered in my head the devil I felt had found me a moment before, returning to the grim serenity of God. The last section of the book is called Arrangements. And it's 10 poems, and each poem has 10 lines that are numbered 1 to 10, beginning with the phrase, a poem. And each of these is basically, each one is kind of a direction for a poem, an arrangement, if you will, for a poem. And so I'll just read a few of these. 1. A poem in terza rima, a poem of 18 lines, a poem containing the phrase coin slot, a poem rhyming beguile and tinfoil, a poem with 2 mirrored meanings, a poem under the sign of Scorpio, a poem undertaken in November, a poem that knows it is a poem titled Apostrophe, a poem that never asked to be born. 4. A poem controlled by someone else, a someone who doesn't speak your language, a poem with 2 tongues, an indiscreet poem, a champagne bottle buried under Atlantic, skyscraper built on a schooner, a mud skipper, the Chicago Black Sox, a poem excluding the word the, a poem another alphabet. 7. Any basketball fans in here? Dominique Wilkins? You're old enough to know Dominique Wilkins. Okay. Number 7. A poem human highlight film, a 21-line salute, a poem in Atlanta, Georgia, tape for the knuckle line breaks, a poem with enjammed thumb, a poem for Dominique Wilkins, a poem with a tight fade, a poem on the court, reverse in-written poem, a poem with a pump fake. 10. A poem on a dryer sheet, a poem with static cling, a poem stuck to that first May, a poem losing its virginity. Padiddle poem, a punch buggy, a poem that could save any Amy, a poem that hasn't read Ulysses, a poem that hates talking. This is and isn't the end of the poem, a poem with too many doors. I'd like to read one more. Something very different from anything I've read. This is a brand new poem that I've just written. I'm from Plymouth, Massachusetts, and I'm currently a finalist to be the Poet Laureate of Plymouth, Massachusetts. So I'm going to have to fight these people on Thursday, and whoever wins the fight will become the Poet Laureate. So I'm giving this reading on Thursday in Plymouth, and so I've been kind of writing a lot of new material about Plymouth, doing a lot of research, and also thinking about trying to write some poems that are about Plymouth and kind of weaving a few different strands together, but also poems that are very approachable. And so this poem takes from two separate, distinct events that really don't have anything to do with each other and imagines them kind of being put together. It's called Bob Dylan and Allen Ginsberg See the Sea Serpent of Plymouth Bay, 1976. So in 1857, the great existentialist writer Henry David Thoreau visited Plymouth, and in his journal he writes about the sea serpent of Plymouth Bay, and he writes this, quote, this is from his journal, 14th of June, 1857. It seems the sea serpent was first seen in the bay between Manamet and Plymouth Beach by a perfectly reliable witness many years ago. One morning he saw this monster with a head somewhat like a horse's, raised 6 feet above the water, and his body the size of a cask trailing behind. He was careening over the bay, chasing the mackerel, which ran ashore in their fright and were washed up and died in great numbers. So that's 1857. In 1976, Bob Dylan was in Plymouth with Allen Ginsberg to begin the Rolling Thunder review tour, which resulted in the album Desire, which has the song Hurricane and Isis, my favorite there, Isis. There's a great Netflix documentary by Martin Scorsese about this. It just came out, which is really, really great. So it's 1976, right, the 200th anniversary of the founding. He purposefully starts in Plymouth, which is America's hometown. And the album Desire, the photos on the cover are taken in Plymouth. They're from a photo shoot right by Plymouth Rock and the Mayflower. And Ginsberg was on that tour, kind of, nobody really knew what he was doing on the tour, but he just kept, showing up. And so this poem is imagining Dylan and Ginsberg seeing the sea serpent of Plymouth Bay in 1976. Just two other things I need to mention. Dick Gregory moved to Plymouth in about 1975. Dick Gregory was an African-American comedian and civil rights activist, and he lived in Plymouth until he died. Until he died just a couple years ago. And then the last thing to explain is the word Moloch, which is a word that Allen Ginsberg uses a lot in his poetry to talk about kind of the capitalist system, the evils of the modern world, Moloch. So this poem is written in the rhyme scheme and meter of the song Isis on the album Desire. Bob Dylan and Allen Ginsberg See the Sea Serpent of Plymouth Bay, 1976. It's a test run. Me and Ginsberg saw the sea serpent of Plymouth Bay as we stumbled out a watering hole on Water Street, a long black oily beast swimming away while the country's greatest poet helped me stay on my feet. A fellow traveler, Ginsberg, his job on the tour was not as of yet completely defined. When I got in trouble, he kept me from more. He was always my sight when the night made me blind. I'm getting distracted. The point is, the beast wrapped itself round the Mayflower's hull. It was 290 feet long at the least, with a horse's head, body half python, half whale. And it squeezed on that beautiful ship till the wood was groaning and shaking, and boy, we were shocked. We knew that it wasn't safe to stay where we stood, so Ginsberg and me took off toward Plymouth Rock. We climbed up the pillars and got on the roof. The sea serpent started to gargle in fury, and sincerely, I don't want to come off aloof, but from this point on, details get kind of blurry. Ginsberg got talking about this historic old town, pilgrims, Wampanoags, the lobster, the height of forefathers' monument. Wait, the renowned Dick Gregory just moved here? This place is all right. The serpent kept squeezing. 'Twas getting obscene. We climbed down the pillars to see what we could do. In Mayflower Park, I surveyed the scene. We'd come back tomorrow and take pictures, too. We got to the state pier, and there was the serpent, dripping with water and drooling black ooze. By then, I was wondering just how much I'd spent at the fisherman's saloon, drinking all that cheap juice. No matter. The serpent just gargled and squeezed until we believed the old Mayflower would crack. So I gave it a kick in the gills and said, please, man, get out of here, and don't ever come back. Then Ginsberg stepped up, jingling his finger cymbals, and chanted, "Toothy darkness, sick serpent of Moloch, beast swum from the deepest of misery's riddles, begone by the power of the one Plymouth Rock." The serpent let go, and like a black blob of blubber, melted into the waves as it sank out of sight. And then me and Ginsberg, two cultured landlubbers, walked back to the tour bus to sleep off the fright. So from that night to this one, nobody has seen it. The sea serpent of Plymouth Bay disappeared. I've told you the story, and I really mean it. This happened, I lived it. I know it sounds weird. Tell me, who doubts a man who is playing guitar? I travel the country in search of a truth that cannot be bought or caught in a jar. These legends that make up America's youth. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Providence College Podcast. Please rate, review, and subscribe to all the podcasts here at the college on Spotify, iTunes, Google Music, and more.